Well, actually, I was curious because I'd never heard before about the flak houses, and that the bomber crews were being sent to when they'd basically said, all right, we're done right now. I mean, what was the casualty rate of the bomber crews? It was something completely insane, wasn't it?
Well, it was. They had a 25 mission requirement, and the percentages said they couldn't make it. Now, we're talking in early 43. The start of the heavy bombing thing was late 42.
So let me just focus in on that for 1 second, just to explain to everyone what that means, because I did know about the 25. So if you were a bomber crew, you were flying in what, a B-17?
B-17, B-24.
A B-17 or B-24, big giant flying fortresses, and they would get attacked, ruthlessly attacked, and they'd fly deep into France and on into Germany, and they would get swarmed and attacked by German fighter pilots and also anti-aircraft guns from the ground.
That's right.
And so it was hellish to get through. And it was so bad that they said, okay, well, all you have to do is this many missions. And the number was 25, which I did know that number. You had to make it through 25 of these bomb runs, and you were done. You that was it. You didn't have to do anymore. But you're saying the chances of actually making it through those 25 was minimal.
The percentages were against you. Now, sure, some people are going to get through. Some people are going to be shot down on their first mission. They don't get a second mission. But and this was the problem with the heavy bomber forces, right. And we almost lost that one. I mean, we came close. Well, we were at the ragged edge, and I'm repeating what I learned as a youngster at that time, trying to be an aviation cadet. The guys were hanging on by our fingertips.
When you say we almost lost that one, you mean we almost had to stop the bombing campaign?
Well, the British were after us. They had switched to night bombing for this very same reason, to stay away from the fighters. Mm-hmm. And so our philosophy of heavy bombardment goes back to General Mitchell in the early and 30s and late 20s, in fact, the early 20s, that the bombers will fight their way through. And that was the theory of the B-17. And gosh knows they were heavily armed, but they were up against a determined enemy. And they're 500 miles from home, and German fighters, all they got to do is step out. Mm-hmm. If they don't like what's going on, bail out. You're going to come down and we'll go get another airplane. But those were dark days. And they were dark days until the first fighters, the P-47s could only go so deep.
Right. What could they go, like 200 miles deep?
200 miles, yes, and have enough fuel to get home on.
And the rest of the times, the other 300-mile round trip or 400 extra miles were all the bombers by themselves.
If it was 50 miles, it was hell. Once the fighters turned back. So they sent they ended up with 4 groups of P-38s. The 38 was not ready to go to war over Germany at that time at the altitude. We were having trouble with the airplane, and we didn't have the latest modifications to the airplane. So part of our problem was engine problems with the Allison engines, but they went anyway. And so then the 51 came along. The 51 had a British engine which had been developed in that very same area, and they weren't having the cold. Their engine had been designed to operate 60 degrees below zero, and so they matched the two up. And so in late 43, they get the first group over there, and now there's a little hope. The airplane could go the whole way. The 38s had been going to go the whole way, but 38 had been modified for the Pacific, and there was no heat in the cockpit, and you're sitting up there at 60 degrees below zero, freezing your tail off with the oxygen mass that's actually frozen to your face. Heat came in, you had one warm spot in the whole cockpit, and that was your right foot. That's where the heat came in. So everything else is freezing your fanny off, and we had problems. Luckily, the British engine and the 51 and North Americans' tremendous design put together the airplane that could do the job.
And then could the P-51s escort them the whole bombing mission?
They'd go the whole way and then cruise around and go someplace else.
Wow.
The 38 could do that. It had the fuel to do it. But again, there's an old story about the 38 that kind of broke our heart. There was two great modifications to the P-38. The 38 at altitude, up with the bombers, and they're hit with fighters. You can get into a scrap, and the German rolls over, and they had, I explained the flick roll that I encountered. They'd do a flick roll in split S, make a dive to the deck. If a 38 did that and tried to follow them, the airplane would accelerate into what we call compressibility. And compressibility was nothing more than a shock wave off of the wing that killed all the control in your empennage, so you couldn't pull out. So all you could do was ride it down until you got into what we called thick air. You got then your trim tab, if you set it properly, would gradually bring you out of that dive before you hit the ground. Some of them hit the ground. Mm-hmm. So, and we had a very slow rate of roll in the 38. So they developed aileron boost. So we could roll with anybody. They had the dive flap. So if you went in, you could actually hit the dive flap button, put that airplane straight down and dive with anybody, any German fighter. So what Lockheed did, they got 400 ship sets of dive flaps and aileron boost. They put it on an Air Force transport plane, and they sent it to England. It got intercepted off the English coast by the RAF, who didn't know anything about it. They thought it was a German Condor, 4-engine, everything. They shot it down.
Oh, boy.
There goes all of our improvements. And so what do you do now? It took quite a while to pull all those 400 units together and get them over there. So for the next couple months, the 38s are doing the same old thing. We don't have the improvement. P-51 comes along, thank God, and it can do the job. So it's all history.
Yeah.
51's had trouble. I know of one that pulled out of a dive and the whole damn engine fell out of the airplane and the guy got killed. But they had engines quit. A single engine fighter, that's the problem. If somebody throws a rock at you and it hits the radiator, you're all done. So, but those were trying times.
Yeah, I guess I was, with all that, thinking about these guys that were in those bomber crews that would need a break, and they say, okay, you need to go over here and not think about this. And it reminds me of, talking about, Dick Winters from the 506 Band of Brothers, and what he would say when he would see guys were getting stressed out. He'd get them off the line, get them out of it, and give them the rest that they need. And then I think there's a certain part of you that goes, okay, like I need to not think about this right now. And then I think you got to say, okay, now I'm going to talk about this. And the fact that you get around your friend, and that's what a lot of people that listen to the podcast, a lot of veterans that listen to the podcast, they go, now, I've had my break, but now you're talking about this stuff, and I appreciate it. And lets me know that I'm not the only guy that thinks this way or had those thoughts or, went through this. And I think that's good. So I think you do need a break. And actually now that I think about it, when I was in Ramadi, the book that I read every night was About Face by Colonel David Hackworth, and I read it every single night. And then about 3 months into deployment, I wanted to. I didn't want to think about, I didn't want to go to bed sleep thinking about, the war. And so there was a random book sitting around, and I picked up, it was actually a book called The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which is about the hippies in It's written by Tom Wolfe, who wrote The Right Stuff.
Sure.
But it's a great book, and it was so completely outside of what I was doing that it gave me, like a mental break. And I read that book, and it was, it took me 4 days to read that book, and I got done, and I put it away. I pulled About Face back out, and I continued on. But I just needed a little bit of a breather, right? Just a little bit of a mental breather. And I guess hippies and LSD provided me with that. Reading about those hippies and LSD provided me with this mental break. And it was actually, it's a very interesting book, and it shows the mentality that those people had, which was, the way he summed it up was me. Everything's about me. And that was what was good for me to read this book. I'm like, okay, that's not how I want to be with my life. It's not about me. It's about, what we're trying to do here. So yeah, I think sometimes people need a mental break. I can't even imagine what what was going on in one of those flak houses with those guys.
Is that like an R&R for you?
It was an R&R, and it's they were run by the Red Cross, and I was at Mulford Manor, which was right on the Thames River. Of course, I was there when we had the ice storms. In fact, when I left the Flak House to go back to Paris, I couldn't get a ride across the channel. And guess what? Our friend Glenn Miller got a ride and disappeared. And so I'm trying to get across the channel to Paris, and it's between Christmas and New Year's. And I went out to several of the bases around London to get an ATC aircraft to go to Paris, and they're all grounded. And so I went down to Southampton, and two ships had just come into Southampton that were going on to Le Havre, and so I got on board. And they were hospital ships with complete complement of general hospitals, like 2 or 3 different general hospitals, and are full of nurses.
Uh-oh.
And so New Year's Eve, we're on this ship with all these nurses, and we're on, I guess you'd call it battle stations, because the E-boats from the German E-boats were operating in the channel, and we're going across from Southampton to Le Havre, and all these nervous nurses from the U.S. needed comforting. But,
did you get a medal for that?
yeah. So anyway, that was the story. Now, just how I got to the end of this story, I've forgotten.
I don't even care anymore.
How did I get there? But I picked up a couple things when we were talking, and when I got shot down, you read this citation. Well, I didn't know anything about that citation. I had gotten my fanny shot off. I was not happy. I kept thinking, what could I have done different that I could have stayed in that fight longer? And I never came up with an answer. What could I have done? So for from September till I get this orders to go to Paris, to Spots' headquarters, I was not the highest. I didn't think much of myself. Why couldn't I have done a better job? But reading that citation and then belonging to a group called the Legion of Valor, which there are not too many Air Force guys left in it, and I read what these people have done, these ground crews. In fact, one of my very close friends had the Distinguished Service Cross, and they just upgraded it to Congressional Medal of Honor, and he's gotten quite a bit of publicity. And he was in Vietnam. And my comment when I saw that he had gotten the Congressional Medal of Honor at this late date, I thought was, God, somebody finally read his citation. Mm-hmm. And when you think that what all of these guys did, a lot of the fellows in the Legion of Valor are medics. What they did in combat conditions and got the Distinguished Cross, the Navy Cross, and so forth. It's, I read my citation, it took 6 minutes. That's all. And then I read a book called I'm No Hero.
Oh, come on.
And I think, God, Charlie Plum, 6 years of that? 6 minutes for me. What he went through is just unbelievable to me. And so don't give me the bunk about, I'm no hero, he's my hero. But it's deep thought.
Well, thanks for that, Jim. I appreciate your saying that.